What happened to the class clown after graduation? For context, I graduated high school 4 years ago, and back then, Eric was the class clown. Like, not just someone who made a few jokes, but the guy who would do anything for a laugh. He once filled the principal's office with ping pong balls that poured out when she opened the door, convinced the lunch staff he was allergic to, the color green, and even streaked across the football field during a rival game with Go Tigers painted on his back. Everyone thought he was hilarious, even the teacher secretly, except Ms. Harrison, who hated him with a burning passion. Anyway, I hadn't seen or heard from Eric since graduation. We weren't close friends or anything, just classmates who occasionally talked. I honestly kind of forgot about him until yesterday, when I went to my cousin Brittany's wedding. The ceremony was beautiful, but during the reception, I noticed this super quiet guy sitting alone at one of the tables, barely touching his food and not talking to anyone. Something about him seemed familiar, but I couldn't place it. Brittany came over and was like, "Have you talked to Eric yet?" And I was genuinely confused, because the only Eric I knew was class clown Eric, and this serious, withdrawn guy looked nothing like the wild person I remembered. But OMG, it was him. Same person, completely different vibe. I went over to say hi, thinking maybe he just didn't recognize me. He mumbled a hello and I sat down, trying to make conversation. The whole time, he kept glancing around the room like he was checking for exits or something. His hands were shaking slightly when he picked up his water glass. And I noticed a small scar across his knuckles that definitely wasn't there in high school. I asked how he knew Brittany. Turns out his mom and her mom are friends, and tried to bring up some of the funny stuff from high school like, "Remember when you put all those rubber ducks in the swimming pool during finals?" Thinking it might make him smile. His reaction was so weird. He didn't laugh or even smile. He just stared at me with this empty look and said, "That was a different person," in this flat voice. The conversation was super awkward after that. I asked what he'd been up to since graduation, and he just shrugged and said, "Not much." When I pressed a little, he mentioned he'd been away for a while but didn't elaborate. I asked if he was in college or working, and he just said neither right now and changed the subject to ask about me. Then Randy, another old classmate, spotted us and came over all excited. "Holy shit! It's the Eric!" He practically shouted, slapping Eric on the back. Eric flinched so hard at the contact that he knocked over his water glass. Randy didn't notice and kept going on about the good old days, and asked Eric to tell the story about the time he stole the mascot costume before the championship game. Eric just stood up without saying anything and walked outside. Randy looked at me like WTF, and I just shrugged because I was equally confused. I found Eric about 20 minutes later sitting alone on a bench in the garden area. I sat down and asked if he was okay, and he didn't answer for a long time. Then, without looking at me, he asked if I ever thought about Lisa. Lisa was in our class. She was quiet, kind of a loner, but super smart. I hadn't thought about her in years, TBH, and I told him that. His jaw tightened and he just nodded like I'd confirmed something for him. She was the only one who ever called me out. He said everyone else just laughed or looked the other way. I had no idea what he was talking about. Called him out for what? His pranks? They were harmless. Everyone thought they were funny. When I said this, he finally turned to look at me and his eyes were intense, like he was seeing right through me. "You really don't get it, do you?" he said. "None of you ever did." I asked what he meant, and he just shook his head and stood up to leave. But then he paused and said something that has been echoing in my head ever since. "You know what happened after graduation? Life happened. Reality happened. Consequences happened." Then he walked away. I was completely confused and kind of freaked out, so I went to find Brittany to ask what was up with Eric. She pulled me into an empty hallway and lowered her voice to tell me the story. Apparently, 2 months later, I found out that he had been... That's how Brittany began. Apparently, 2 months after graduation, Eric was arrested. Those words hit my stomach like lead. I remember shaking my head, laughing in disbelief. "Wait, arrested? Eric?" She nodded, her face serious. And then she told me everything. After high school ended, Eric disappeared. Literally. Nobody knew where he went. Even his social media had no activity. He vanished as if he had evaporated. But in reality, he was getting into one mess after another. It started with silly things, small break-ins, thefts, games, according to him. But time passed, and without the laughter and applause from the high school audience, it escalated. He didn't know how to live without the gaze of others, without being the center of attention. And when he realized it, he was arrested for assault. I was shocked. Brittany said he was accused of beating up a guy at a bar, but that the case was actually deeper. The guy he assaulted was Lisa's father. Yes, Lisa, the girl he mentioned in the garden. I was speechless. A buzzing filled my head, and when I finally managed to formulate something, all that came out was, "But why?" Brittany hesitated. She seemed to weigh her words. And then she said, "It seems like he thought Lisa had ruined his life." I stood there, trying to piece it together. Brittany explained that back in school, Lisa had made a report against Eric. Nothing official, but enough to open the administration's eyes. They said he invaded lockers, stole things from students, and that nobody ever took it seriously because everything was in the name of fun. But Lisa was the only one who wrote a letter, a long and detailed letter, to the administration, telling how she felt threatened, how he crossed boundaries, and how nobody did anything because he was funny. That letter became an internal document, and even without serious consequences at the time, it stayed on his records. When he tried to get into college with a full scholarship, the letter resurfaced. The interview was canceled. The opportunity vanished. And that was just the beginning. I left the wedding disoriented. Eric, that boy who made us laugh until our bellies hurt, had become a shadow of himself, carrying on his shoulders the weight of everything he himself had caused, and that nobody ever saw as serious, or worse, that everyone thought was brilliant. On the way home, I kept thinking about Lisa. I remembered the way she held her books against her chest, how she avoided others' gazes, how she always seemed uncomfortable whenever he made some joke. How many times did we laugh at her expense? How many times did we think she was overreacting? And then came the worst part. I remembered one specific day. It was art class. The teacher asked us to draw something that represented what made us feel insecure. I remember Lisa drew a person with a bucket of paint being poured over her, while an audience of silhouettes laughed. At the time, we thought she was being dramatic. And Eric took her drawing and stuck it on the school bulletin board with a little sign that read, "Drama Queen." I laughed. I saw that, and I laughed. Me. That night, I had trouble sleeping. I kept tossing and turning in bed, staring at the ceiling, with Eric's phrase echoing in my mind. That was someone else. And maybe he was talking to me too. Maybe I was also someone else back then. Or maybe I just hid behind laughter like everyone else. But something inside me changed. I needed to see Eric again. It wasn't just curiosity. It was a necessity that gnawed at my chest as if I owed something to him, or maybe to myself. The next morning, I went back to Brittany's house. I said I needed to know more. I needed to understand. And that's when she revealed something that caught me completely by surprise. Eric, he still sees Lisa. Every week. What do you mean? I asked, incredulous. He goes to her grave. I felt my legs give out. Lisa was dead. And I didn't even know. The phrase kept hammering in my head like an alarm that nobody turns off. Brittany noticed my shock and pulled up a chair for me, as if she knew I wouldn't be able to stand for much longer. When? My voice came out weak, almost a whisper. 2 years after graduation, she replied. She took her own life. My throat closed up. Her name, which until then was just a blurred memory of a quiet and distant classmate, suddenly became a weight. A name with history, pain, and a tragic ending that nobody commented on in the high school groups, that nobody posted on social media. Why? I asked, as if there was a simple answer to that. Brittany took a deep breath. It was a combination of things, according to her parents. She had been fighting deep sadness since high school, but never opened up to anyone. They say she kept everything inside. And that letter about Eric was the most she could do for herself. And after the school covered up the case, she simply lost faith in people. I felt a mixture of anger, guilt, and heavy sadness pierce through me like a knife. I tried to remember if I ever even talked to her in high school, if I helped her with an assignment, if I offered a smile. But all that came to mind was the sound of our laughter as she walked past us looking at the ground. Brittany continued, her voice low. After she passed, her parents were devastated. They made a memorial in the park where she used to walk. Eric showed up there one day. And since then, every week he goes to the bench where she liked to sit, brings a flower and stays there, just looking at the lake, without talking to anyone. And nobody does anything? Nobody asks anything? My voice was now trembling. He doesn't talk. He just goes. And stays. Rain or shine, he's there. I stayed silent for a while, absorbing everything. The Eric I saw at the wedding wasn't just a lost guy. He was a man drowning in regret. A survivor of himself. He carried that, even if he never said it out loud. I left Brittany's house with a knot in my chest and the park's address written on a piece of paper. I spent the night awake, ruminating over memories and questioning everything I thought I knew about others and about myself. The next day, I went to the park. The place was simple, beautiful. Old trees, dirt trails, a small lake in the center. I saw the bench, and he was there, sitting, motionless, like part of the landscape, with a white flower in his hands. I stood for a while, watching from a distance, until I gathered the courage to approach. When I finally got close, he didn't look. He just spoke, his voice low. "You came. You knew I would come?" "No, but I'm not surprised. It's always after everything happens that people remember." I sat next to him, not knowing what to say. We stayed in silence for long minutes, hearing only the sound of leaves swaying and the lake water being touched by the wind. "Why do you come here?" I asked. "Because it's the only place where I hear her," he replied. I frowned. "Hear how?" He turned his face to me, serious. "When I shut up, I hear what she was trying to say." Those words gave me chills. Not because of the mystical tone, but because they made sense. He wasn't saying he heard voices. He was saying that by stopping trying to be heard, he finally heard others. Something he never did when he was the class clown. "You blamed her for a long time, didn't you?" I asked without beating around the bush. He closed his eyes. "Yes, and that's why I deserve the silence. The forgetting. The loneliness." "And do you think she would like that?" I countered. He stared at me for a moment, and I noticed a different gleam in his eyes. It wasn't anger. It was pain. A deep, silent, bitter pain. "No, but it's not about what she would like. It's about what I did." Silence again. This time, it was mine. Because he was right. Sometimes consequences have no forgiveness. And maybe they shouldn't. But what we do with them, that's what matters. That's when he told me something that chilled me to the bone. One day, I found her notebook. Notebook? During the last week of school, I broke into Lisa's locker. I wanted to pull one final prank, you know? But I ended up finding a notebook, full of texts, drawings, thoughts, things she never showed anyone. And one text was about me. "About you?" He nodded. She said that, despite everything, she still thought I could change, that nobody was born bad, just lost, and that she hoped that one day when I looked in the mirror, I would see more than a funny reflection. I was paralyzed. "That text saved my life," he continued, "because when I almost gave up, it was there, as if she was saying, 'You still can.'" I looked at the lake. It was a beautiful day, but everything inside me was cloudy. Still, I felt that something was changing. Maybe it wasn't redemption, but it was a beginning. That afternoon, I left the park with the weight of a lifetime that wasn't mine on my shoulders. Eric remained sitting on the bench, looking at the lake, and for the first time I understood that distant look. It wasn't empty. It was a contained scream, an apology that nobody had heard, and that might never be accepted. As I drove back home, everything seemed different. The street, the people, even the sound of music on the radio. Nothing seemed light. Nothing seemed right. And deep down, I knew that part of it was my fault too. I spent the following days obsessed with memories. I dug through old photos, joined old class groups, and even looked for Lisa's profile, which was still active but stopped since the last post. A drawing of a girl sitting alone in the rain, without a caption. I stared at that post for minutes, maybe hours, imagining how many times she screamed for help in silence and nobody listened, how many times I walked past her without looking, how many times I chose to laugh along with the others. That's when I decided to do something, not out of heroism, not for redemption, but because I couldn't pretend anymore that nothing had happened. I went back to look for Eric. I sent a message, he ignored it. I sent another, same thing. I called, he didn't answer. Until days later, I received a simple message. Memorial. Tomorrow. 10 a.m. That's all it said. The next day, I went to the park. The same bench, the same lake, but this time there were flowers scattered around. Photos of Lisa. Small notes left by other people from school. Someone had set that up. Maybe her parents. Or maybe Eric himself. He was there. Black shirt, worn jeans, sunken eyes. But there was something different about him. A certain firmness. As if he knew he needed to do this. There were more people, too. Brittany, Randy, other classmates. All silent, uncomfortable, like those who carry a nameless burden. Eric stepped onto a small, improvised platform. He took a deep breath and spoke. I know many of you are here because you felt obligated. I understand. I've been in that place, where everything seems like obligation, not regret. He paused. The wind swayed the tree leaves, and all eyes were on him. But today, I'm not here as the class clown, not as the guy who screwed up his own life. I'm here as someone who finally listened, and it hurts. His voice faltered a little. It hurts to remember that I caused laughter at the expense of someone's pain. It hurts to know that all of us, looked at Lisa and never really saw her. He looked around. She tried to tell us, in drawings, in words, in silence, but we didn't listen, because laughing was easier than paying attention. More silence. The kind of silence that weighs. She believed in me more than I believed in myself, and I destroyed that. He then took from his pocket a piece of paper carefully folded. It was the page from Lisa's notebook, the one where she wrote about him. He read it aloud. Every word, without dramatization, without tears, just the truth. And that was more devastating than any scream. Eric is loud, but I think he's just someone trying to be heard. I hope that one day he sees that he can be more than a joke, that he can be someone real. At the end of the reading, he didn't say anything more. He just placed the page among the flowers, sat on the bench, and lowered his head. Nobody applauded. Nobody shouted. Nobody tried to console. We just stayed there, in silence. The same silence that Lisa lived. After that day, something changed in me, and from what I noticed, in many others too. The high school group, which before only posted memes and memories of past craziness, began to be used for something else. People shared stories, apologies, forgotten memories. A week later, I received a private message from an old classmate. Do you think if we had listened before, she would still be here? I responded honestly, maybe. But now we can listen to those who are still here. That month, the school organized, with the help of some alumni, an emotional support and active listening project with current students. They called it Project Lisa. And you know who was the first volunteer? Eric. It wasn't the Eric who filled teachers' lockers with balloons or who hacked the school system to change the morning anthem to Rick Astley anymore. It was another Eric, silent, attentive, who used his own pain as a bridge. The first time he told his story was to a room full of restless teenagers. At first, they laughed, made jokes. But as he kept talking, everyone fell silent. And when he finished, a girl in the front row raised her hand and said, "Thank you. You told my story too." There, I realized that sometimes karma doesn't come to punish. It comes to teach. It comes to remind. It comes to transform. And Eric was being transformed. But the past, as I would discover later, never stays completely buried. Despite everything Eric was doing, the lectures, Project Lisa, the weekly visits to the bench in the park, there was something he still hadn't faced. A piece of the story that remained guarded, like a locked drawer inside him. I knew he carried more than he showed. There was something in his eyes, as if he was still waiting for the final punishment, the one that never came. And it would come. One day, a few weeks after the memorial, I was helping organize the project files when I found a letter. It wasn't from Lisa. It was from her mother. A letter that was never delivered. It was in a yellow envelope, addressed to the school administration, dated 3 years ago, a few months after her daughter's death. The letter was devastating. My daughter died silent, but not because she was weak. She died because the world around her chose to laugh instead of listen. She asked for help, repeatedly, and every time she was ignored or ridiculed. That school was part of it. You weren't accomplices. You were active. You put a shield of tolerance around a boy just because he was charismatic. Because he drew laughter. You laughed while she cried. And when she fell, nobody noticed, because the circus was louder. She ended by saying, "I don't want justice, because nothing will bring my daughter back. But I want truth, because truth, unlike my daughter, can still live." I closed the letter with trembling hands. I needed to show this to Eric, but I also knew he wasn't ready. Or rather, maybe he never would be. I kept the envelope and waited, until, on a cloudy afternoon in the park, when I found him quieter than usual, I decided to tell him, "Eric, there's something you need to see." He looked at me, tired, not surprised, as if he knew that at some point this would come. I handed him the letter. He read it in silence. The whole time, line by line. When he finished, he didn't say anything. He just let the paper fall on his lap and stared at the lake, motionless. "She was right," he murmured finally. "I was protected. By everyone. Even by myself. Do you think you can live with that?" He hesitated. "No, but maybe I can do something with it." The following week, Eric scheduled a meeting with the new school principal. I went with him, and for the first time, he told everything. Without softening, without beating around the bush, from beginning to end, he talked about the thefts, the invasions, the humiliations disguised as pranks. He talked about Lisa's letter, about how it was ignored, and he handed over her mother's letter. The principal, a firm woman with eyes that had seen much, listened to everything without interrupting. At the end, she said, "The school failed. We can't change what happened, but we can ensure it never happens again." That's when the proposal emerged to transform Project Lisa into an official school program. With funding, with real psychological support, with monthly lectures. Eric was appointed as volunteer coordinator, and this stirred up the city. Some people criticized. They said it was unfair to give this role to someone who had done so much harm. Others defended, saying it was the strongest form of change, a former oppressor now being a tool of consciousness. But the impact was real and immediate. In the following months, other students began to tell their stories. A girl who suffered bullying for being deaf and using an implant. A black boy who pretended to laugh at racist jokes because it was easier. A trans girl who hid in the bathroom between classes because nobody accepted her. Eric listened to each one. He sat on the same bench with the same posture and listened. As Lisa once said, he finally listened. Until one day, after one of these sessions, he called me to talk. "I think I found Lisa's father." "What do you mean?" "The man I assaulted, who got me arrested. It was him. I didn't know. At the time, I was just drunk. We argued over something stupid. But now, looking at Lisa's photo, I recognized the look. It was the same look that man had when he stared at me on the ground, bleeding. I stayed silent. The revelation was brutal, but at the same time, it made everything fit together. What are you going to do? What I should have done from the beginning. Talk to him. Ask for forgiveness. The next day, we went to the house. A simple house with a well-kept garden and yellow curtains in the window. Eric knocked on the door with sweating hands. Lisa's father opened it. The two looked at each other for long seconds. "I am Eric." The man didn't react. He just stared at him. "I was the one who hurt Lisa, and then who hurt you." I thought he would close the door, but he didn't. He took a step outside. "Speak." And that's how, in the garden of that silent house, Eric told everything. What he did, what he hid, what he learned. He didn't ask for forgiveness like an actor. He asked like a man in pieces. A man who didn't want forgiveness. He just wanted to be heard, for the first time truly. Lisa's father didn't say he forgave him, but he said one thing. "I lost my daughter, but maybe you can save other children. Just don't stop." And with that, he went back inside. Eric left there in silence, but with something different on his shoulders. Not lightness, but direction. And I knew, at that moment, that this story wouldn't have a happy ending, but it would have meaning. And sometimes that's all we need. Life doesn't restart like in movies, where everything resolves in 2 acts and a sad song in the background. Life continues, dragging wounds, stitching silences, and demanding choices every day. That's how it was with Eric. And in a way, with me too. After the visit to Lisa's father, I noticed Eric began to change. It wasn't an explosive, visible change like the ones he used to make in school to get attention. It was subtle. A firmer way of lifting his head, a different way of walking, less the look of someone expecting to be punished, more of someone who knows they carry a purpose, even if painful. The project grew. The school transformed it into a model for other institutions. A team of psychologists began attending to students weekly, and the first listening room was named after Lisa. The bench in the park, where it all began, got a metal plaque with an excerpt from her letter. Even if he doesn't see it now, I believe he can be more than a joke. The visits to the bench became monthly meetings with alumni. And not just those who suffered, but those who caused pain too. For the first time, these two worlds sat face to face and talked, and cried, and asked for forgiveness. But of course, the world outside doesn't stop. And the past, it always finds a way to knock on the door. It was on a Monday morning. I was opening the project coordination email when I saw an anonymous message with the subject, "Do you really think he changed?" I clicked. The message was short, a single line. "A monster can put flowers on a grave, but that doesn't make it less of a monster." And attached, a folder of videos, old videos, from school days. Videos I had never seen before. The first showed Eric breaking into a wheelchair-bound student's locker and throwing everything on the floor, laughing. The second, him invading the girls' locker room and locking the door with a chair while filming from outside. The third, was of Lisa. She was crying in the bathroom, leaning against the wall, and someone was filming from over the partition. Eric's voice, unmistakable, whispered, "The princess is in the castle of tears." That disgusted me. I watched them all one by one, and at the end I felt dirty. That went beyond what we knew, beyond what he had confessed. It was cruel. It was perverse. It was premeditated. I stopped breathing for a few seconds, staring at the screen, not knowing what to do. What should I do? Delete? Ignore? Confront? I picked up the phone. I called him. He answered on the second ring. "I need to see you." "Need to see now." "I know why," he replied. His voice was different, hard, ready. We met at the old school library, now renamed Lisa Montero Listening Center. He was sitting at the table, with his hands joined and his eyes down. I threw the USB drive on the table. "This came to me today. Anonymous." He didn't touch the USB drive. He just took a deep breath. "I knew it would come one day. And there's no defense. Why didn't you ever tell? This goes beyond anything you've ever admitted." He looked at me. "Because I'm still ashamed, and because part of me believed that if I said it, nobody would listen to the rest anymore. That my attempt to do good would be erased by who I was." "But you understand what this means, right?" I asked, trying to contain my anger. He nodded. "It means maybe I need to leave. Step away. The project can't carry my name. Lisa doesn't deserve this." Silence. "The project doesn't have your name, Eric. It has hers. And maybe that's exactly why you should continue. Not because you deserve it, but because she believed you could change. And changing isn't about forgetting what you did. It's about never repeating it again, and never allowing others to repeat it." He cried. For the first time in front of me. He cried for real, not theatrical sobs. He cried in silence with his eyes squeezed shut, like someone holding the world and unable to bear it anymore. And then he did something that surprised me. The next day, he presented the videos to the school, in public. He said he had lied by omission, that there were still parts of his past that he hadn't faced, out of fear, shame, and cowardice, and that from that moment on, he would give up coordinating the project, but not the mission. He offered to be the first student in the school's new emotional rehabilitation program, to undergo counseling, to study, work behind the scenes, to listen more than speak. The community was divided. Some asked for his expulsion from the project. Others defended him. But in the end, he stayed. In another place, in another role. And it was in that silence, in that absence of applause, that he finally began to rebuild himself. Months passed. Project Lisa became a national support network. Eric now lives outside the city, working with youth in rehabilitation. Sometimes he sends messages, simple ones. Things like, "Today a boy said he was thinking about disappearing, but after our talk he said maybe he still has a tomorrow." Or, "I miss the bench. I remain here, telling this story. Because now I understand that my role wasn't to be a spectator, it was to be a bridge. And if you've made it this far, listening to all of this, maybe your role is the same, because easy laughter passes, but the pain left in silence, that stays. And sometimes just listening to someone truly can be the first step to saving a life." What happened to your child that made you realize nuclear was the only option? When my daughter was 13, she suddenly became extremely excited about going to school. This was the same girl who 2 weeks ago tried to play dead to skip class. So naturally, I asked her why the change. "Oh, I now have Mr. Davidson for history every day. His class is super fun." I smiled, glad she was finally not hating school. I didn't think much about it again until a week later, when Emma started setting her alarm 30 minutes earlier just to pick out the perfect cutscene outfit. It's not like Emma never cared about her appearance, but she was always fine with just throwing the first clean thing on. I remember asking her if she was trying to impress a boy she had a crush on, and her face went totally red. "Don't say that, Mom," she yelled. That's when I got truly suspicious. I started looking at her normal teenage mood swings more carefully, and I realized they were always related to Mr. Davidson. She'd never admit it. But I noticed things like, if Mr. Davidson complimented her project, she'd float around the house for hours. But if Mr. Davidson didn't acknowledge her much that day, she'd barely speak and pick at her plate during dinner. That's when I tested her in a subtle manner. "I was thinking of moving you out of Mr. Davidson's class. I think it would be good to—" "You can't do that!" she yelled before I could even get my words out. I stared at her blankly. "But why not?" I asked. Silence. Deafening silence. She didn't say a word, just stood up and beelined straight for her room, pulling up her phone to text someone before she even reached the stairs. This was Emma, my girl who just 2 months ago didn't care about a single school-related thing. She was always extremely open about everything too. So this was a huge problem. That night, I crept into her room and searched through her phone. I know this was a huge violation of privacy, but I truly felt like I had no choice. I had a gut feeling she was in danger. I combed through every messaging app I could find, looking for anything at all related to Mr. Davidson. And that's when I found it. An email thread on a backup email she had made seemingly specifically for communicating with him. The last email from him read, "Can't wait to see you during my free period tomorrow." My hands started shaking as I opened the thread, and what I read made me want to throw up. Mr. Davidson was telling my 13-year-old daughter that she was mature for her age and special, and that their connection transcended normal student-teacher relationships. He sent her photos of gifts he'd give to her, and she'd tell him she was hiding them in her bag. I quietly went through her bag as soon as I read it, and that's when I saw it. Expensive professional makeup, mature outfits, stockings, all as gifts from Mr. Davidson. I wanted to puke. What do you even do when you realize your daughter is being groomed? The first thing I did was take pictures of everything with my own phone while trying not to scream. My first instinct was to tell the school, tell the police, tell someone, but I knew I couldn't, because Mr. Davidson wasn't just any regular teacher. Mr. Davidson's parents donated a lot to the school. His brother was the police chief who'd just spoken at our PTA meeting about protecting children. His wife was on the school board. If I went to the authorities, they likely wouldn't take me seriously, maybe even destroy me. And so I did the only thing I could think of. I started documenting everything while pretending everything was normal. I began volunteering at school without Emma knowing, and watched how he interacted with her. I took photos of the gifts and backed up the emails to different clouds. I started watching documentaries with Emma about consent, and talking about news stories where teachers hurt students. I could see the hamster wheel in her head turning as we watched these. She'd often excuse herself midway through, fidget nervously, bite her fingernails. She was finally realizing the truth of what was happening. Unfortunately, this progress was cut short by what is now the worst day of my life, Tuesday. Emma came home from school early saying, "I saw him, Mom," she said. "I saw him do with another girl exactly what he did with me." She took a deep breath, as if the truth still hurt coming out. At recess, "Mr. Davidson," he talked to her. Exactly the same way. The same words. "You're special. Different from the others. I love talking to you." He said this looking into her eyes. He touched her shoulder, like he did with me. My mouth went dry. And the worst part, she continued, her voice breaking, is that he looked at me afterward, as if nothing had happened, as if I were invisible, as if everything he said was just rehearsal. My heart tightened. I knew. Deep down, I always knew. But hearing it from my daughter's mouth, seeing her face imploding, was like taking a punch to the stomach. "Emma, you're not to blame for anything. None of this is your fault, okay?" I said, holding her hands. "I thought he cared about me, Mom," she said. "I thought that I was important, that he really saw me." She closed her eyes tightly, as if trying to erase the last few months from memory. "He said he wanted to meet me today, after class, that he had a special gift for me. I didn't know what to do. I wasn't going to go, but now I see. He lied to me the whole time." I froze. This was no longer a supposition. It wasn't just suspicious messages or behavioral changes. It was direct confirmation. He was trying to isolate my daughter, use gifts, words, and promises to prepare something that she, innocent as she was, hadn't yet named. But I knew the name, and it was disgusting. I hugged my daughter tightly, swallowing the scream that threatened to escape my throat. She trembled, but didn't cry anymore. She seemed empty. "You won't go through this alone anymore," I whispered in her ear. "I promise. I'll take care of you. And he'll never come close again. Never again." She nodded, saying nothing, and fell asleep right there, exhausted. I covered her with a blanket, got up, and closed the living room door. I knew that from that moment, my life would be different. I couldn't wait anymore. Or trust in protocols. I needed to act. Now. But to act, I needed proof. And the next step would be even more difficult. That night, when Emma finally fell asleep, I sat in the dark for long minutes, staring at nothing. My heart was restless. I knew I couldn't simply sleep and pretend that all of this would pass with a conversation or blocking his phone. This wasn't a teenage fight. It was serious. Too serious. And I needed proof. I needed to show, clearly who he really was, even to her. I went to Emma's room, took a deep breath, and carefully picked up her phone. I knew the password. I never needed to use it without permission, but that was more than permitted. It was necessary. I opened the messaging app and went straight to the history with Mr. Davidson. The latest messages were there, intact. He called her my smart girl, said she had a different glow, that the way she saw the world was unique for someone so young. The words seemed gentle at first glance, almost like common encouragement. But they weren't. Not when added to the context. Not when I knew what he was doing. I replied carefully, pretending to be her. Hi, you said you had a special gift. What is it? His response came in seconds, as if he were waiting. You'll love it. I chose it with care. But I'll only show you if you promise not to tell anyone. It's just ours, okay? I swallowed hard. I continued. Where are we going to meet? He sent the address of a remote park, late in the afternoon the next day. Said it was safer there. Added a winking emoji. And then wrote, Bring that black purse you used last week. You look beautiful in it. At that moment, my body froze. This wasn't just an innocent conversation. It wasn't just a teacher crossing boundaries with words. He was planning. He was confident. This wasn't the first time he had done something like this. You could tell by the way he wrote, as if he knew exactly how to manipulate. I continued the dialogue, maintaining the pose of a curious and anxious girl. He began to speak more openly. Said he had been waiting for this moment for a long time, that it was difficult to restrain himself in classes, and that she needed to understand that their bond was too special to fit within the school. He used words like true connection, secret friendship, freedom to be who we are. I read each sentence as if it had a blade piercing my chest. I took screenshots, copied the messages, saved everything in more than one place. My whole body trembled, but I knew I needed to maintain control. He thought he was in command, that no one would ever challenge him, that he was untouchable. I closed the app, dropped the phone on the couch, and put my hands on my head. I breathed deeply several times. I cried silently. Because, at that instant, it really hit me. If I didn't do something, no one would. Could I go to the school? They would probably silence me. His parents were donors to the institution. His wife was part of the board. His brother was the local police chief. I wasn't stupid. I had seen similar stories before. And they all ended with the victim being discredited and the predator transferred to another school with a clean record. But with me, it would be different. If the system was rotten, then I would create my own. And at that instant, I opened the browser and typed with trembling fingers, how to report online predators without involving local authorities. I spent hours that dawn immersed in websites, forums, videos. Each link I clicked led me to another case, another story, another muffled cry for help. It was scary to realize how much more common this was than imagined. And worse, how so many powerful people were capable of silencing everything with a wave, a donation, or an influential surname. But it was on Instagram that I found something that caught my attention. A video with the title, "We Caught Him Live. He'll Never Approach Anyone Again." It was from a page with thousands of followers that confronted people who posed as teenagers to attract adults with bad intentions. They filmed everything, brought evidence, and only then called the police, with everything documented. I watched one, then another, then another. The pattern was the same. They assumed the victim's profile, arranged a meeting in a public place, showed up with cameras and evidence, and directly confronted the aggressor. There was no screaming, no lynching. It was strategy, control, exposure. That was exactly what I needed. I contacted the profile, not expecting an immediate response. I explained everything, that I was a mother, that I already had screenshots of the messages, the meeting address, time, everything. I sent screenshots, reported the history. I made sure to be clear and objective. I ended with a sentence that hurt to write, but was true. If I don't do something now, he'll do it to another child, maybe worse. It took time, an hour, maybe two. And then came the response. We've read everything. It's serious, very serious. We're going to help you. My eyes filled with tears, this time of relief. They called me for a video call at that same instant. It was a group of 4 people, all with firm but respectful voices. They explained how it would work. They would take over the conversation with Mr. Davidson, maintaining Emma's profile. They would play his game until the right moment. We would arrange the meeting in a busy park, preferably on a Saturday, where there would be witnesses and natural security. Everything would be recorded from at least 3 different angles. And in the end, the police would be called with everything ready. Evidence, location, time, history. But what if he leaves? What if he runs? We prevent it. We're not violent, but we're not stupid either. We have practice. We know how to handle it. And you won't need to get involved. Just tell us where you'll feel safe. They conveyed confidence, seriousness. Nothing like those sensationalist pages that make scandals to get likes. These were people who wanted to prevent more children from being victims. I said I would agree. Of course I agreed. But the truth is that inside I was panicking. The risk, the exposure, the tension that something could go wrong. It was a difficult weight to bear. But then I looked at Emma's phone, still on the table, and remembered what I read in the messages. Everything he had said. How she believed she was special. She was special. Not because of him, but for being who she is. For being my daughter. And no one had the right to play with that. We set the trap for Saturday, 3 days later. The group asked me to stay distant, watching from afar, so that Emma wouldn't be at risk and Davidson wouldn't notice anything strange. They would take care of everything. That night, I didn't sleep a minute. I sat next to my daughter's bed and stayed there, listening to her peaceful breathing. I fixed her hair strands, like I did when she was a baby. And I promised silently, he will never touch you again, not even with words. Never again. Saturday dawned with a strange silence. Emma was still sleeping, and I had been awake for hours. I showered, changed clothes, and left with some excuse. Said I was going to the market, that I'd be back quickly. She believed it. She had no way of imagining what was about to happen. I arrived at the park half an hour before the agreed time. I parked far away, enough not to be seen. The group was already there, discreetly spread out. One of them was adjusting the tripod of a camera hidden among the bushes. Another was pretending to take photos of the landscape with his phone. The third was eating a sandwich on a wooden bench, wearing sunglasses, observing everything. And the last one was disguised as a common teenager, using his phone, pretending to be the Emma that Davidson was about to meet. I positioned myself behind a tree, nervous, sweaty hands, shaky legs, and then he appeared. Along the gravel path, coming with an almost bouncing step, there he was. Mr. Davidson, light polo shirt, pressed jeans, new sneakers. He even seemed happy, relaxed, as if this were just any walk, as if meeting a student outside of school were the most normal thing in the world. He approached the disguised young man, who continued looking at his phone. "Hi," he said with the voice I already recognized from afar. It was at that instant that the group moved. 3 of them surrounded Davidson in silence, like closing a trap with perfection. The one with the camera approached from behind, already recording everything. "Mr. Davidson," said one of them firmly, "we know why you're here." He stopped, not understanding. He looked around, confused. "Excuse me? Who are you?" "We're people who protect children, and we have everything you wrote to a 13-year-old girl thinking she would be here today." At that moment, he turned pale. "This is a misunderstanding," he murmured. "I didn't do anything. This is a setup." "Then why did you arrange this meeting?" The other shot back. "Why did you bring this gift?" and pointed to the bag in his hand. Davidson began to sweat. He tried to laugh, disguise, say it was a joke, that everything was misinterpreted. But they continued talking, showing the screenshots, reading excerpts from the messages, phrases he had written, words he used to manipulate. He began to back away, to walk backwards. "I'm going to call a lawyer. This is illegal. You can't—" "What's illegal is what you were doing with a minor, Mr. Davidson." That's when he turned his back and tried to run. But he couldn't. 2 of the young men reached him quickly. One held him by the arm, the other blocked the front. He lost his balance and fell sitting on the grass, dirty, panting, and completely exposed. "Don't touch me!" he screamed, but by this time several people in the park were already looking. Some were filming with their own phones. Others were whispering. The truth was spreading before everyone's eyes. "We have everything recorded, everything saved, and we've already called the police," said the group leader, showing his phone. Davidson still tried to get up, but someone, perhaps by reflex, pushed him back. Not with excessive violence, but firmly. He fell again, this time with a dry slap to the face, given by one of the vigilantes, who looked at the camera right after and said, "This is for what you tried to do to this woman's daughter." My heart froze. I was there, a few meters away, and everyone knew who the girl's mother was. No one looked at me directly, but I felt seen, represented, avenged. When the patrol car arrived, everything happened quickly. The police officers got out in a hurry. One of them had already seen the video broadcast live and said that was enough to take him in custody. Davidson tried to explain, tried to justify himself, but there was nowhere to run. He was handcuffed right there, in front of everyone. As they took him away, he looked back, scared, lost, ashamed, and for a brief moment, I almost felt sorry. Almost. But then I remembered my daughter's expression when she realized she had been deceived. The way she cried, as if her world had shattered, and any feeling of pity evaporated. That night, back home, I sat on the couch with Emma and hugged her. She didn't know everything yet, but she could tell from my look that something had changed, and for the first time in a long time, she slept with her room at peace. Davidson's arrest wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. The following Monday, I received a call from the detective responsible for the case. The search and seizure at his apartment had already been completed, and the content they found, well, he didn't even need to describe it. The pause in his voice said everything. But what he told me afterward confirmed what I already feared. Davidson wasn't doing this only with my daughter. They found message exchanges with at least 4 more teenagers of the same age. Some archived conversations, others deleted but recovered. Photos, audios, small videos. He had built a secret routine, acting calmly, using the same methods, the same sweet words, the same expensive gifts. And the worst part, he had been doing this for years. When the video of the confrontation in the park was officially published by the group, with proper protection blurs and explanations about the case, it exploded. It went viral in a matter of hours. And with it came the comments, the messages, the reports. One mother wrote, "This man was my daughter's teacher in 2020. She was 12 years old. Now everything makes sense." Another, even more direct, "He gave my daughter a lipstick in secret. I thought it was strange, but the school said it was kindness. Today, I'm in shock. Dozens came, maybe more than 100. Some old, others current, all keeping the same feeling. Something was wrong, but no one knew how to act. No one had proof, until now." The formal complaint happened 2 days later. The prosecution filed for preventive detention, and it didn't take long for the sentence to arrive as well. His name was removed from the school's staff roster. His image disappeared from the exemplary educator's wall. But now, everyone knew. Davidson was sentenced to a long term, without the possibility of appealing in freedom. The video, the screenshots, the reports, everything added up to a solid, irrefutable process. Meanwhile, Emma changed. At first, the trauma still visited her in long silences and sporadic nightmares. But with the psychological support we sought, she began to understand that she wasn't to blame for anything, that she was manipulated by someone who used his position to hide, and that her courage, telling me everything, saved not only herself, but other girls too. She regained confidence gradually. She went back to drawing. She went back to speaking with enthusiasm. And one day she told me a sentence that broke me inside. "Mom, I think I want to use what happened to me to help other girls, so they don't feel silly like I felt." I hugged her so tightly that I ran out of air. She was no longer just my daughter. She was a survivor, a voice, a light for others who might still be in the dark. Nowadays, we are both invited to conversation circles in schools, not to tell names or expose details, but to teach, to alert, to remind people that danger sometimes wears a tie, says good morning in the hallway, and pretends to teach. The community changed too. The school implemented new protocols. Teachers began to be more supervised. Parents started paying more attention. And most importantly, children began to be heard, for real. And even with the scars, even with everything that could have been avoided, today I can say with a firm chest, we won. And Davidson will never have the chance to deceive anyone again, not with the whole world watching. Sometimes I find myself sitting on the porch, looking at the evening sky, and remembering everything that happened as if it were an unresolved nightmare. But then Emma appears laughing with some book in her hands, or calls me to see an illustration she drew herself, and I remember, it wasn't a nightmare. It was real. And still, we survived. But no one came out of it the same. Emma, for example, is a different girl now. She remains sweet, but not naive. She learned with a hardness I never wanted her to face that the world can be dangerous even where it should be safe. But she also discovered something more, that she is strong, that her voice matters, and that when it's heard, it can change other people's lives. She still goes to therapy, not because she's broken, but because she knows that taking care of the mind is as important as taking care of the body. Sometimes, on some quieter nights, She still gets restless, tosses and turns in bed, but they're increasingly rare. And today, she looks me in the eyes with firmness. She knows what she wants. She knows she deserves respect, and she doesn't accept less than that. She signed up for a support group for girls who went through similar experiences. She's been giving talks in schools, even at her young age, and she told me the other day, "Mom, I'll never again think that staying quiet is easier. That's worth more than any diploma." Me? Well, I changed too. I was never the combative type. I was always more the type who resolves things through dialogue, patience. But when it comes to protecting a child, you discover strengths you didn't know you had. Today, I'm active in educational campaigns. I help other parents identify early signs of manipulation and abuse. And above all, I'm a mother who learned to listen. With my eyes. With my heart. For a long time, I blamed myself for not noticing earlier. But today, I understand that guilt doesn't build. Vigilance does. And attentive love saves. Mr. Davidson. Well, his name became synonymous with warning. He serves his sentence in a closed regime with no forecast for reduction. The lawyers tried everything, but the evidence was overwhelming. Besides our case, 4 other families formalized complaints. One of them revealed that they had tried to warn the school years ago, but were ignored. Now, everything came to light. The last news I had of him was during the final trial, when he tried to make a speech saying he was misunderstood. The prosecutor simply replied, "You were understood perfectly. That's why you're here." And there ended the career, reputation, and disguise he had used for so long. The vigilantes, well, they continue with their work. The video of Emma's case was the one that went most viral on their profile to date. Millions of views, interview invitations. But more important than fame was the impact. They received support from NGOs, psychologists, child protection councils. They improved their methods. They created partnerships with cybercrime departments. And they know they can't take justice into their own hands, but they can expose what needs to be seen. They sent me a message recently. "Your daughter saved lives, and so did you." The other girls. Well, each story is a universe. Some were already away from school. Others were still trapped by fear, doubt, trauma. But the exposure of the case made them receive real support. Therapy, legal support, qualified listening. Some mothers came to me, emotional, saying, "You gave us courage to speak." There's no prize in the world that pays for that. The school, of course, went into crisis. They tried to deny at first. Then they tried to minimize. But the public pressure was too great. The board was replaced. Protection protocols were updated. Today, there are cameras in hallways, training to identify suspicious behavior, and a new policy of active listening for students. I still distrust some internal intentions, but at least now, they know they're being watched. And as for the community, it woke up. People began to look at their own children with more attention, to ask questions that before seemed exaggerated, to understand that abuse doesn't always have an ugly face or a rough voice. Sometimes it comes disguised as a compliment, a gift, a special friendship. And finally, to myself, I learned to trust again. Not in the system, not in authorities, but in myself. Because I did what was right, even when it was difficult. And because my daughter looked at me in the middle of chaos and saw a safe harbor. She survived. We survived. And if there's someone listening to this now, afraid, with doubts, thinking they won't be able to handle it, I tell you, you can. You're not alone. And yes, you can do something, even if it seems small, even if no one believes at first. Because all it takes is one determined mother, one complaint made at the right time, one truth exposed with courage, to change everything. This was our story, but I hope, from the bottom of my heart, that no other mother needs to tell a similar one. Never again.